Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. On today's episode, we're going to be diving into the story of a global supply chain leader doing big things in the industry and based right here in Georgia. And he's one heck of a guy, a musical artist, a very talented individual, and a friend of the show. So let's dive right in. I want to welcome in our featured guest here today, Dennis Flynn, Vice President of Global Logistics at Stanley Black & Decker, Inc. Hey, Dennis, how you doing?
I'm good, Scott. Glad we're getting a chance to do this. We've been looking forward to this.
I am too. Well, it's been in the works for a while. I've gone through your agent a couple of times. Who knows? We might book an interview and a gig. We'll see. But
thanks
Dennis,
for the limo, by the way. Appreciate you sending that
out. Listeners, he's only kidding. He's only kidding. We can't afford limos. Hey, but kidding aside, great to have you here. This has been a long time in the works, and it's so neat to be able to dive into the Dennis Flynn story a little bit more. But before we start picking your brain on all things supply chain, let's get to know you a little better. And I want to start with, Dennis, a question I don't think I've ever asked you, so I've been looking forward to your answer. Where did you grow up, and give some anecdotes about your upbringing?
Oh, wow. Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia. My dad was in the Army. He worked at the Pentagon for years. And so I kind of had that whole DC Caps, those were my sports teams, the Bullets back when they were called the Bullets, the Wizards now. So very much a DC guy, still am. Around my junior year of high school, though, we moved to Florida. And so I ended up then learning how to surf and lifeguard and do all this other kind of more Floridian stuff. So kind of two different places influenced me growing up. I ended up at the University of Florida for undergraduate. And love that. Obviously, I'm a sports fan, as you know, because we've talked about baseball before. So a big school like that and being in the SEC was awesome. Seeing all the athletes we saw come through that place who went on to become Hall of Famers, either in football or basketball or baseball.
So, really quick, not only plenty of athletes coming through the University of Florida, but of course, Tom Petty. We're going to touch on music in a minute. Tom Petty, I think, was Gainesville, right?
He was, yeah. It was Mike Campbell, the guitarist, I think, went to the University of Florida. I don't think Tom ever set foot in the classroom. I know he worked at the university. I think he was a landscaper, but
right.
Yeah, he's obviously musically a huge influence, and in Gainesville, he is the native son of Gainesville. So
yes. Well, hey, I'm going to go back to your Washington, D.C. That's where you grew up. I didn't know your father was in the Army. That is really cool. How did y'all move around a lot? And if you did it help train you how to kind of meet new people and build new relationships regularly?
Yeah, I'm laughing because that's exactly what it did. I was born in Germany and yes, moved around a lot. We lived in Louisiana. We lived in Fort Leavenworth. My dad was in Vietnam for a period of time where I lived with my grandparents, and then on to Virginia. And what that does, your question is really astute. You're forced to quickly adapt. You're the new kid, and you have to understand the landscape pretty quickly, and determine what activities you want to be involved in, who you want to be friends with. So, yeah, there's a fair amount of that. My wife went through that too. She moved a lot. Her father was in academia, so we've always had that in common. That ability to be the new person and kind of quickly settle in, establish yourself, kind of dip a toe in the water, not barge in, but kind of slowly make your way into what's going to be your circle, your clique, your group of friends.
That is really a valuable trait to have because it's so challenging. Now, I remember when I was a kid, just not having moved around, just how tough it was from school year to school year. And then, of course, I see my three kids doing it now, and it's tougher. And I don't know if the digital world is making it easier or making it tougher. Probably a little bit of both. But
probably a little bit of both.
Yeah. Okay. I want to transition. I want to talk food and music, and before we talk supply chain. So
Okay.
food. So you lived in a bunch of communities. You touched on, of course, DC. You touched on Florida and Gainesville. What is one food dish that is inseparable from that earlier part of your journey? What's one thing you wish you could go get a plate of now?
Mm. So my mom's side of the family from Jacksonville is Lebanese and Syrian. And so my grandmother would make all this Lebanese and Syrian food. And Jacksonville had, I don't know if they still do, but at the time they had a lot of different kind of mom and pop Lebanese and Syrian restaurants. And that, you know, kibbe and tabbouleh and safiha and pita bread.
Mm,
Oh man, that stuff still, if I can see it, and there's a place or two in Atlanta that does that, but I love that kind of Middle Eastern comfort food, I guess I'd call it. That's formative food for me. That's soul food for me.
I love that. I love that. Now, thanks for making me hungry. We're going to move from food. I want to talk about one of your other passions that I've come to appreciate. I've never had the opportunity to catch you live on your gigs, but
Hmm.
you're a big passionista when it comes to music. You play the guitar. I think you also sing and provide some acoustics. Maybe tell us about your music, your love for music, and any influences that you have on your music.
Yeah. So yeah, and you and I have had this conversation. Yeah. So I play in a band here locally. The name of the band is My Favorite Baldwin. So I'm going to ask you not to ask any follow up questions on how that name
Okay.
came about, but I'm super fortunate to be friends with some other guys who live here in the Sandy Springs area who are all passionate about music, and um, you know, we all play different instruments and have a pretty similar taste in music. So the set list is pretty easy. It's all cover songs and just kind of whatever people our age are going to like, you know. So there's going to be some 80s, some 90s, some current stuff so that we don't look like we're too old, but it's a ton of fun. So you asked about influences. They're really kind of all over the board. I'm a huge Prince fan, and I think some people know, not everybody knows, that he was an amazing musician. Obviously, a
Mm.
great showman, but an amazing guitar player, pianist, you name it. Um, when it comes to guitar, David Gilmour, you know, from Pink Floyd. And the reason I like him so much is because he doesn't play fast, kind of like me, but his note selection and his solos is just perfect. And so
Mm.
I follow a lot of what he does because I think I'm capable of, you know, getting in the same ballpark as him. I listened to a lot of Van Halen growing up, but there's no way I'm going to be playing, you know,
Eddie
that's
Van Eddie
that's
Van
just more
Halen.
for me to, yeah, it's the kind of music you listen to and you go, yep, he can play that and I can't. Uh, and then a lot of jazz guitar players too, like Wes Montgomery. I love listening to him. Just smooth. The guy named Mark Whitfield, who's a jazz guitar player, not a lot of people know about. So those are kind of my influences.
I love it.
Um,
You,
yeah.
so one of my favorite parts of being a father is I've got three kids. My oldest two are daughters, and my last one is my son. And my daughter, I'm not cool enough in my daughter's eyes, maybe, for them to embrace my music for the most part. My middle child thinks I'm a little bit cool, so that's neat to see. But my son, it's really interesting to see him embrace some of the music, some of my music, right? Like I'm a big Queen fan, and he's
Mm.
become a big Queen fan. He can Bohemian Rhapsody and Under Pressure. We love David Bowie too. He can almost sing those songs word for word, and that is really it's really cool to see. Because I stumbled upon I didn't listen to much radio until I was probably later in high school, so I didn't have an appreciation for the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, all the historic musical acts. So he's going to
Mm.
have a lot of that appreciation, I think, at a far earlier age.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. My son has picked up the guitar and has become really, really good. And I didn't teach him. He just, I guess maybe saw me and said, "Hey, that looks fun." But he's listening to the Doors and Zeppelin and all these classic bands, and he's formed his own band now, and it's been again through no, I'm not going to give myself any credit, but to see him play and us now talk about, hey, what scale do you play on this song, and how did you play what chord? That's been a lot of fun. Has been a great kind of bonding thing for him and I, and he has surpassed me in his talent. So I'm
I
now
love
going
that.
to him. How do you play "A Whole Lot of Love" by Zeppelin? What can you show me that? So
That's
that's
awesome.
been fun. Yeah.
All right, so I know, Dennis, whenever you're ready to kick off a new podcast series, it's going to be music, the love of music with Dennis Flynn. All right, I can already
Yeah.
picture it in my mind. Who knows?
I'll
But in the
copyright it.
meantime, yes, right. In the meantime, I'm gonna circle my calendar and try to come out and see my favorite Baldwin in person. So we'll see.
Okay.
All right,
I'll hold you to that.
so we're having too much fun talking food and music and kind of your upbringing. We got to get to our heavy lifting, right? We got to talk. We want to talk supply chain with Dennis
Yeah.
Flynn, but before we talk about your current role at Stanley Black and Decker, let's talk about a role or two that you held before your current role that really shaped your worldview, Dennis.
Sure. So I think the first role that was like that was at Coca-Cola, where I worked and for 16 years and loved every minute of it. And it was a role where I was working in the logistics and supply chain areas around process improvements, Six Sigma projects, and in the process got my Six Sigma, my green belt certification. And I think a couple things I learned there. First of all, when you're in that kind of work and you're gathering a lot of data, the data gives you the right to ask the right questions. The data is not always judge and jury in supply chain, because that leads to the second thing I learned, which is any action you take in the supply chain is going to have an impact on some downstream action, right? So if you are selecting a different carrier, it's going to have an impact on both the pickup and the delivery. If you're choosing a different way to do warehousing or a different warehousing software, it's going to have an impact on those warehouse workers and potentially on storage and production. Nothing happens in isolation. So as you're working through projects, really from demand planning and production scheduling all the way to getting it to the shelf, you have to be cognizant and very cross-functional in all that work so that you understand what the upstream and downstream stakeholders might experience as a result. You've probably seen it. I've seen it where someone might optimize their area, but then there's an impact, and so you have to be really careful there. That's one of the big learnings, one of the formative experiences for me. I think the other formative thing
Hey,
about
really
Coca-Cola
quick, if I
is,
can,
yeah, go
hey,
ahead.
Dennis, really quick. So one of the things I take away from what you shared there is how you came to appreciate true systems level thinking from your
Yeah,
16 years there at Coca-Cola. Is that right?
yeah, totally.
Mm. Mm.
Helped to work in a plant, helped to work in a warehouse. I think those experiences give you credibility and a lot more understanding when you're making decisions, say in a conference room, to know what it's like to be in the plant, to be in the warehouse, to manage the fleet. Um, that I think that helps too.
Mm. Well
The other
said.
thing I was going to say, and it's not supply chain related, is the power of brands. The power of strong brands is a big deal, and I've realized that through the rest of my career, and been fortunate to work for other companies with really strong brands as well.
Mm. So one quick follow-up question, then we're going to get into what you're doing now at Stanley Black and Decker. Talk about the culture at Coke. 16 years at Coca-Cola. I've been into headquarters um, just a couple of times. They hosted one of our events in my very first startup, and it was a uh, fabulous experience. But what was one thing about the culture there at Coke that you really appreciated?
Boy, just one thing, huh? I think it was the focus on the brand and the importance of the brand, and not doing anything to compromise that. And not just the brand, but also the customers and their ability to portray the brand and display it in a way that was becoming of what it is, which really is an icon. Here in the Southeast, the beverage decision is a big one, right? People are very passionate about their brands here for beverages in the Southeast. Outside of the Southeast, maybe not so much, but the culture there at Coca-Cola, well, one of the many good things about the culture there was just the focus on how important it was to protect the brand and to make it what people expect, which is something they can
Mm.
depend on. They know they're going to get the same flavor, the same quality every time they open it up. They know when they go to the store, it's going to be right there. It's going to be stocked, and that to me was probably the most important cultural thing I took away.
I love it. That fulfilling that brand promise is one of the things I heard there. And you're right. Here in the southeastern United States, you know, things aren't carbonated beverages are not sodas; they're Cokes here in the
Yeah.
southeast. I grew up;
Mhm.
everything was a Coke. Now, doesn't mean everything is the same quality as a Coke, but if it was a soda type of beverage, it was a Coke. So you're right. Very important here. So, Dennis, we could do a whole show probably about your 16 years at Coca-Cola, but I want to move forward because I want to move to what you're doing now as
Mhm.
vice president of global logistics at Stanley Black and Decker, which is a company that everybody and their brother and sister is probably familiar with. But if you would talk about your role and, in a nutshell, talk about the company.
Sure. So my role is, and it's new to me, is uh, VP of Global Logistics. So I'm going to be looking at how our product moves across the world by all modes, and so I'm really now tied very much into the global macroeconomic picture. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question, Scott?
So for the three people that maybe have never used one of your products, across the world, everyone's very familiar with the company, but just for the two or three people that may not be, what does the company make?
So we're making tools, power tools, hand tools, outdoor equipment. We're really growing in the outdoor equipment category. Um, Brands like DeWalt and Craftsman are really our big brands. A lot of people know our Fat Max tape measures. So, and we're available, gosh, everywhere. I mean, anywhere people
Everywhere.
shop, whether that's in stores, online, really, really strong brands. And, very much like Coca-Cola in terms of brand strength, just obviously in a different category. But a
Right.
strong focus on brands, an exceptionally strong focus on quality, and really a great company.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper. I want to talk
Mhm.
about kind of looking back at last year and then looking ahead at this year, the rest of this year. So if you and your team were to look at 2021, what would be a couple of things that y'all are really proud of that you were able to do from a supply chain standpoint?
Well, I think 2021 was a challenge, right? And that's not news to anybody. I think keeping the supply chain going, keeping very engaged with our customers around their promotional needs, their new product needs, the different seasonalities that we have, and being very in communication with them and transparent with them about what was going on our side. High levels of collaboration with our customers is a big one because that flows all the way back up through our supply chain into planning and sourcing and all those critical functions that have to happen. Um, and then working in a remote world, keeping our teams engaged. I'm proud of how well not just me, but really my peers, my managers, our senior leaders did a great job, I think, at keeping people engaged, understanding that there can be fatigue after your 10th Zoom call of the day. So I think there was a really big focus within the company on making sure the people were right. And
Mm,
I appreciated that because I hope anyway that I dispensed it, but I also know I was the recipient of it from my managers and our leadership team. So
mm.
I think those were our big accomplishments last year for sure.
There's a bunch of them there. So before I talk about 2022, kind of take picking up one of the points you just made during the latter part of your answer, it's fascinating. Yeah, I think these last few years are going to be studied for a very long time,
Yeah,
from business
I agree.
schools, from psychology schools, from you name it. But one of the things I look at as a business leader and entrepreneur is for about 3 or 4 years prior to the pandemic and prior to starting up Supply Chain Now, I was part of a small recruiting firm, a great, powerful recruiting firm, but a small business. And I think of how I interacted and how I led, and how all the things I did in that small remote business prior to the pandemic. And man, then I think about everything that we've learned the last couple of years as everyone has gone remote, right? And you've kind of figured out how to optimize that, right? And how to build relationships and take care of your people remotely. And Dennis, I'll tell you, I'd go back and I'd do about 1,000 things different. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I've really learned a lot in these last couple of years, huh?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as you were asking or making your comments, one thing that popped into my head is I've really learned the difference between or the spectrum of introversion and extroversion and in
Mm,
between, and how different people contribute regardless of where they are on that spectrum. But adjusting your approach a little bit more. For example, when you recognize folks on your team who may be a little introverted, those Zoom calls are draining, and they
right.
need a period of time afterwards, like to sit back and think and reflect and process. Others are much more comfortable with Zooms and like to put them out there, or the video meetings, whatever your platform. But yeah, I would have gone back to your point. I would have gone back and recognized that a little bit more around a conference
Yep.
room table or talking to someone in an office or a cube. That to me has been and I've recognized it in myself. Um, the fact that after the second, third, fourth Zoom in a row, I got to have a break, or I'm not
Right.
necessarily good for the people who are depending on me to be a leader.
Present. That's
Or
right.
you're right, or my managers who are depending on me to be pretty sharp and coming into each of these sessions with some crisp, clear thought. So yeah, I agree with you, Scott. It's been
Mm.
and as we're getting back into the office now, because I have started to actually go into the office like a lot of people, travel a little bit. Um, I can start to see the benefits of having adjusted the approach to different
Yep.
people depending on where I believe they're most comfortable.
Love that. Appreciate your introspection there. If I said that right, introspection. Is that what I'm trying to
Intros,
say?
you know, I
Introspective. I
was
don't
never
know.
awesome at vocabulary, but I'll buy it. Yeah.
Okay. So Dennis, and we're going to revisit what the pandemic taught you in a second more formally, but let's think about 2022 when it comes to
Yeah.
Stanley Black and Decker Inc. What are some of your priorities in 2022?
Well, a lot of them carry over from 2021, right? Making sure that we are doing everything we can from a logistics standpoint to get, to have that intersection between service and efficiency, service being the priority. I also want to make sure as we look at the carrier landscape, um, capacity, rates, that we are being smart there, that I'm talking with other peers of mine, and I do talk very frequently with peers of mine who I've worked with in the past who have similar positions at companies, names that you've heard of. And we're all looking at the macroeconomic environment, wondering how does spending go up or down going forward? Are we headed toward a recession? What is that going to do to capacity? What's that going to do to rates? Um, Looking at the potential for a work stoppage in Southern California at those ports. What does that mean? And just in general, making sure that as spending potentially changes from goods over to services and experiences,
Mm,
what's that going to do to the flow of goods? And
right.
so that's what I'm focused on. And again, as I talk to my peers and friends who do similar roles at other companies, they're all going through the same thing. What's going to happen at a macroeconomic level that's going to impact the logistics world, all the way from origin to origin port and the ocean piece, and then the drayage piece from the port into the different manufacturing plants and distribution centers. each one of those pieces is a little different. COVID, like for example, right now, I think most people know that COVID has impacted the port of Shanghai.
Right.
Well, really, Shanghai port operations are continuing. It's the trucking into and out of that's the issue, and so that's
Right.
where you have to focus your attention now. And then the potential for labor issues in Southern California is something everybody's got to keep on their horizon. Who's got any kind of supply chain that extends globally and into Asia. So those are kind of the main high level 2022 things I'm looking at, and I know my peers are as well, at least the ones I speak with.
Mm. I'm really hoping. There's lots of different takes on anytime government kind of gets into the private sector, but I'm really hoping that the Flow initiative that the White House recently announced, where it
Yeah.
really focused on kind of sharing the data and visibility amongst a variety of shareholders, I really am hoping that we can make some progress there. And then secondly, macroeconomics still to this day, some 20 plus years after my college experience, still conjures up dread in the pit of my stomach. I was not a good economic student, and my teachers pointed it out time and time again. So a lot of good stuff there, Dennis. I want to kind of shift gears. I want to talk. Were talking a second ago, kind of because we both had kind of a reflection on the pandemic period and pre-pandemic and what we both learned. But I want to ask you that question again, because what else has the pandemic really taught you about leadership?
That's a really good question. Um, I think for me, it's taught me that you have to develop a real comfort with uncertainty. You have to be able to manage you hear the acronym VUCA, right?
Right.
Everybody's using that. I think you have to be the ability to deal with ambiguity, to make decisions with the information you have, not knowing what event might happen tomorrow, be it a weather event or a strike or a pandemic, and go with the best data you have at the time and make your decision and move forward. But to the extent you can build some flexibility into it, the ability to change or redirect a little bit down the line, that works to your advantage. Um, Looking at things right now, yes, rates are going up, and I just saw today that air freight rates have gone up just this month again. Is that the case a year from now? Who knows? Based on some of the macroeconomic things we were talking about earlier. So, as people are going to look in my conversations, as people are going to look at rates and contracts, that's something they need to consider. But back to your question on leadership, it really the main thing it's taught me is that you have to be willing to lead, make decisions with a lot of uncertainty, and to the extent you can, build in flexibility to adjust those decisions as time goes on.
Love that. And you mentioned VUCA. So for our listeners that may not have heard it or may not have taken the time to kind of go see what it stands for, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I believe that VUCA originated at the Department of Defense War College here in the States, if I'm not mistaken, and now has been embraced by the supply chain community for the last couple of years for sure. Okay. So move right along from things that we learned from the pandemic, leadership and beyond. Let's broaden the scope a little bit more. You've already
Mm-hmm.
mentioned some of the things you're tracking and some of the things you're talking about with your peers, which was really neat insights there. But if there's one other thing, as you're surveying the global business world, the global supply chain, you name it, what else comes to mind that you may be tracking more than others?
Hmm. Well, again, consumer behavior, consumption. Is there going to be a trend in spending away from goods and more toward experiences? And then a big one I can't believe I haven't mentioned yet is people, employees. talent, not just capturing or capture. That's the wrong word. Attracting good talent, but then keeping it engaged. I think everybody's heard about the Great Resignation, and while I think it gets a lot of media coverage more at perhaps the distribution level and as it deserves, I think it also is important at the kind of more the office type role as well. Keeping people engaged. There's employees have choices now. It's a candidate's market, and you have to find ways to make them feel valued, to make them feel invested in, developed, show them a path toward career development in the company they're in. I think most people out there would say, I'd rather lose an employee off my team to another group internally where they go off and do some new things for their career, for the company, than to lose them to another company or to lose them to just leaving and maybe exiting the workforce. So the people piece is real. It has to be addressed, and it requires time and attention. And if you shortchange that, it will come back to you.
Well said. And folks, never make any assumptions that your people are happy and content, because that's when those assumptions, that's what can lead to turnover. You got to constantly, in my experience at least, constantly keep that finger on the pulse and have regular conversations and feedback and gather information is so important.
Yeah, and I would just say, one of the things I've enjoyed where I am is that level of contact. And like, I'm not the perfect manager, but I do try to make myself available for people to contact me. I know I've always got a line anytime to contact my management, and that means a lot. That's I don't want to abuse it. I don't want to use it all the time, but it's good to know that it's there.
Yeah.
Also, making sure people know that they're invested in that, and you have to walk the talk there. Provide the opportunities, provide the training, provide the cross-functional introductions, the internal networking, and actively campaign on your people's behalf for the things that they're interested in doing in their careers. Ideally within your company, right? Because you want them to stay and be 20, 30-year employees who leave a legacy of value for the company. So,
really appreciate that. And one of the things you heard there, folks, is use it. You got that line, use it. When you're asked for feedback, give it. And don't be scared. Don't be afraid to speak up and share your mind. Share what you're thinking. Okay, there's one other thing I was going to ask you about based on what you shared there. But sometimes, Dennis, it comes and goes, right? I've learned that as I've gotten older. My 3 kids have killed my memory. Let's talk. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I'm so grateful that industry, to your point about employees and the employee experience, right? It's another one of those X's. Old George Strait wrote that song way too early because you got CX and EX and UX, all that. But thankfully, leadership really have, it seems like to me at least, gotten more serious about what is our employee experience. How can we optimize it? How can we provide a safer work environment for our team members? All of it. That's been one of the silver linings, I think, during this pandemic, to protect the global workforce that's kept things moving. Your quick follow-up thoughts before I shift gears.
I really don't have anything to add to what you just said. You're absolutely right. It gets a lot of talk, and you can YouTube any number of management gurus who'll talk about people, but it takes time. And the old phrase, you have to go slow in order to go fast later.
Right.
You have to invest that time, and it's time that's very well spent, and it will reap benefits for you if you're able to discipline yourself to spend that time. So, not canceling one-on-ones, not canceling staff meetings, even if it's just 5 minutes. When you do those things, I've noticed, at least in my experience, both in having had it happen to me and in having unfortunately done it once or twice, people notice,
Right.
and that level of engagement requires that time. And that's, frankly, for me, as I've gone further in my career, that's where I start to really gain more of my joy in my career, or as much joy in my career as hitting numbers, is also making connections to people and feeling like you've made a difference in their careers, and they subsequently have made a difference in the company's performance.
Love that. Those are important investments, whether it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes. So well said there, Dennis. All right. So a couple of the last things we want to ask you about, if you would. So imagine this, Dennis. I know you've keynoted a lot of different places. You're at the Waldorf Astoria finest hotel in New York City. You're in their largest event space. You've got thousands of students and folks looking that want to break into industry. They want to break into supply chain, and they want to move up, move up the career ladder into senior roles, executive roles like you have. And you've got their captive attention. What would be a piece of advice or two that you would share with those folks?
Oh boy, good question. And by the way, I've been to the Waldorf Astoria. Just had a drink in the bar, but so I never stayed.
Okay, very cool. I don't know if it was still there or not.
What I would say is, I would say, first of all, it's important to be good with data. But as I said earlier, in following my Six Sigma training, data allows you to ask the right questions. It's not judge and jury. So be really good with data, how to get it, how to validate it, and how to use it to drive you toward what appear to be root causes and get you to ask the right questions. The other thing I'd say, specifically in supply chain, is you have to be really good at cross-functional work. Nothing you do happens in isolation in supply chain. You're going to potentially positively or negatively impact somebody else and somebody else's function by what you do. So you have to be strong cross-functionally. Third, I would say, given that a lot of places are pretty lean in terms of staffing, and you don't always have a big team of people to execute, you need to be a good influencer. One of the things two of my mentors at CocaCola were very big on was the power of influencing. How do you get people to cooperate with you and work with you when they don't report to you? So if I'm here over in logistics, how do I get the people at the distribution center, perhaps, so I need to change a behavior, to help me? How do I get them to do that? How do I get someone further upstream, perhaps in the demand planning world or the purchasing world, to help me accomplish a bigger goal? So to be able to paint a picture for your cross-functional partners of why it's important and why you need their help and what the overall goal is, generally tied to a customer, is super important, because you're more often than not in supply chain, particularly in efficiency projects, improvement projects, the people you're working with don't report to you. So those would be the three things I think I would say, and maybe a fourth. One thing in supply chain, because you're often touching base at multiple levels in the company, it's important to be able to know how to adjust your message and your presentation. An example, maybe a 5-page deck with a lot of detail works when you're talking to people who are going to execute something. But when you're presenting it maybe to a steering committee, it's probably 1 page and it's just the highlights. So being able to adjust your communication to the audience, I think, is a big skill in supply chain, because you're going to be in that position where you're in the DC one day and the next day you're presenting it to the chief supply chain officer. So you need to be able to adjust how you communicate.
Man, that's the golden 4-point list. It really is. I want to going back to your second one. I think it was about cross training and be cross functional. That is
Yeah.
Folks, that is a golden piece of advice. If you go to school or if you're getting training or if in your career, if you've done one thing really well, the more you can broaden that experience, learn new things, and bring different value, multifaceted value to the enterprise, the supply chain organization, you're going to have new opportunities. And then to go into that last one, uh, knowing your audience and knowing how much time you have, and perhaps most importantly, knowing what's important to them. Dennis, there was one time, what brought me to Atlanta, I was working in the staffing and the workforce side of things, and we had this big opportunity, that business development sales opportunity. And Dennis, to your point, it's not supply chain, but it's close enough. I went in there with 57 slides, and I was going to share every single one of those slides to those decision makers. And we got halfway through. I was an hour in, and I still had 30 slides to go. And my boss at the time, good old Mike, love old Mike, he's basically like tugging on me, to get to the important stuff. We didn't win that business, and that is a lesson that stood with me. I still like my slides, but man, as Dennis said, you gotta tweak and adjust your communication. Go deep when that's the right time to go deep. Keep it succinct and executive level when you got 2 minutes. So Dennis, this is golden advice. I'm so glad that we asked you that question.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what the appendix is for sometimes, right? I mean, you stick all that detail
Right.
back there, and then if you get asked the question, hopefully you have a slide for it in the appendix. But yeah, you've got to be to the point with these senior executives, because everybody's asking for their time, and you just need to let them know what they need to know.
Yeah. Well said. Love that. Okay. So we're going to have you back, and we're going to keep talking supply chain, keep talking leadership, because I want to wrap on a more of a lighthearted note here today. So
Okay.
baseball season is upon us, Dennis Flynn. It is upon us.
Mm-hmm.
We're big Atlanta Braves fans here. Last year was, in my view, at least to me, completely unexpected. When Jorge Soler hit the shot that still hadn't landed yet. I
Yeah,
mean,
he
to go
drilled
from
that thing.
yeah, oh, he sure did. To go from a point where I think it felt like for a full month, the Braves would win one, lose one, win one, lose one. I think they set a record, major league record for no streaks at all. To go from there to the point where they beat one of the best teams in all of baseball, and did it with just a team full of contributors that could do different things, kind of going back to your point, it was an amazing season. So we'll see what's upon us. But Dennis, give us one fearless prediction for the 2022 baseball season. Thank the good Lord that it's here.
I think the Braves make the playoffs. I'm not sure they repeat. And I'll, obviously I'm a huge Braves fan. You probably can't see my hats back there. And I have another prediction that doesn't have anything to do with standings. I predict that the first game the Dodgers play back in Atlanta, Freddie Freeman gets like a 10-minute standing ovation. I'd love to be there for that game. I don't think there's going to be a dry eye in the house, including Freddie Freeman's.
I'm with you, and it's been really neat and heartwarming to see. When the initial split took place, there were some really tough interviews and words chosen in those initial interviews. But I read that over the weekend that Freddie Freeman spent 3 hours talking with the Braves GM and Anthopoulos, and they kind of had a fuller understanding. And now Freddie invited AA Anthopoulos out to California when the Braves visit the Dodgers. And I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, Dennis, but Freddie was telling the reporter, "Yeah, I want AA to come out because I want to give him a hug for everything we accomplished together." And I'm like, "That's the Freddie Freeman I'm talking about." So I
Yeah,
love that. So
that's
Dennis,
Freddie Freeman.
I'm with you. I'm just glad that we've got one more sport that allows us a little bit of departure time from everything else that's going on in the world, right? So we'll see how all that plays out. But I like your predictions. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today. It's been well
Sure,
overdue, but you're a fountain of good news here and stuff that folks need to know.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I've really enjoyed it, and I love talking about supply chain. I love talking with my peers and hearing. There's a level of comfort sometimes in knowing that they're up against some of the same struggles, and I often get a lot of my best ideas from them, and I hope that I spread some good ideas to them. So, love being on it, love your podcast, and have been a listener. Will continue to be a listener.
Awesome. Dennis, I love that. So for folks that may want to get a little bit more Dennis Flynn, because they didn't get enough today, how can folks connect with you?
Wow. The best way is just through LinkedIn, Dennis Flynn, Dennis Flynn, and with Stanley Black & Decker. I think I'm the only one.
Awesome.
So
I think you are too.
Love to connect to you if you want to talk some more supply chain.
Awesome. Love it. So Dennis Flynn's been with us, Vice President Global Logistics at Stanley Black & Decker. Big friend of the show. Known Dennis for quite some time, and keep moving those mountains. So, but thanks for joining us here today, Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
You bet. All right, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed this great interview with Dennis Flynn as much as I have. Be sure to check out Supply Chain Now and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from so you don't miss conversations just like this. But whatever you do, folks, Scott Luton on behalf of our Supply Chain Now team challenging you to do good, to give forward, and to be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.